Okay.
So Amitesh, are you back? Amitesh, we can't hear you. So I think we'll have to proceed without you, Amitesh. Is that? You are on mute. Hang on, just 1 second. Try now. No, I still can't hear you. Can you try without your headphones? Can you unplug your headphones? Try speaking now, Amitesh.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we can. So your headphones is creating the problem.
Okay.
Because it doesn't have a mic.
Sorry for the...
Okay, guys, we are ready. Sorry for the mess up. Amitesh, please start.
First of all, welcome to the Images webinar series. This is the first of a kind we are launching, and my name is Amitesh. I am an alumni from IIMAGES, and I work as I'm serving as an executive member and in the executive committee and secretary for the Images Society. Images is a not-for-profit society with a focus only on networking and building opportunities for building a pan-IIM network where we can leverage the power of the alumni. This is an extension of what our president, Mr. Salil, started some 12 years back as a monthly meetup, and it continued. And we have built a platform 3 years back, and this is the first time we are hosting this kind of a webinar. I'll pass it on to Salil, a little bit on Salil. Salil is an industry veteran with 35 years plus experience in multiple assignments, national, international, in various leadership roles, including P&L responsibility along manufacturing, services, and serving in various organizations of all sizes, including PwC. He has been, as I said, that running Images, the platform for Pan-IIM Meetup for the last 12 years, and is the president, currently serving as president for Images for the last 3 years. So thank you, Salil. I would request you to proceed, start the proceedings today.
Okay. So thank you all for joining. We have 12 attendees. Welcome everyone. Sorry for the delayed start. I hope some more of your friends will be joining us. We have, we started an initiative with students. We said, can we involve the students in some activities and make it meaningful for students? We have been working with alumni for a long time, creating networking opportunities for alumni. And we thought that we could make it meaningful for students who are studying at the IIMs and provide them a platform to interact with some senior leaders and have some interesting activity. So we have joining us today is Sudip. Sudip is a veteran from the industry. He happens to be my batchmate from IIMAGES. So we both go back, we both passed out in 1983. Sudip is currently with Chris Capital as an operating partner, but that's the role that he has been doing for about 4 years. Before this, he was the CEO of a KKR firm, and earlier he spent many, many years with Wipro Technologies. So Sudip, would you like to tell us a little bit more about yourself to set the context before we jump into some questions? And before you jump in, can I just say one more thing for the attendees? We have a question and answer. If anybody wants to ask a question, just throw it here at me and I will moderate it for you. Number two, we'll try and keep it as interactive as possible to try and make it interesting for everyone. Over to you, Sudip.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Salil. And good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I know it's a long weekend. In India, we have Ramzan on Monday. It's Memorial Day in the US on Monday. So, which is why I'm sure guys have, in this day of COVID, can't go out, but they are gone out somewhere or enjoying the long weekend. Now, we don't have too many people, so I don't have any slides to talk of today. So the more we can keep this whole thing conversational, the better it'll be. And I can get more out of the session. So can all of you, whoever wants to get some questions answered. Some of them will be informed, some of them will be thoughts and opinion, and we'll take it from there. Now, a little bit on the background to add further to what Salil said. We're both 83 batch. I worked, so I'm not a private equity person, though I've been working with private equity for upwards of 10 years in some role or the other. So I have a perspective, of the many sides of truth. I have one side of the truth, so I can give you that angle. Background wise, I joined a little known company, Wipro, in 1983. No one knew Wipro in 83. I joined them and I spent almost 26 years with Wipro. And in a way, even though in the early 80s, startups were not in fashion, it was a startup. And I was employee number less than 100. And when I left the company, there were 105,000 employees. And that allowed me an opportunity to work in different parts of the world for different projects, different bosses. So it's like 5 jobs in one in 25 years. I then, as Salil said, was pulled out of Wipro by Kohlberg, Kravis, and Roberts, one of the top 2 private equities, along with Blackstone, to become the CEO of a telecom company called Addison. I was based in Gurgaon for a year, a little over a year. Then I moved the headquarters to Princeton, New Jersey, and lived there for the next 5-6 years. And I just returned back to India 3.5 years back. And I've spent 4.5 years in Chris Capital as an operating partner. So I am not an investing partner, but I get involved in helping the team do diligence, helping the team assess the management team's capabilities, the strategies of the company before they make the investment. And my real work starts after the investment is made to ensure that the investment multiplies rapidly, becomes higher value, and we make a return. Couple of the roles that I did, which are not very standard.
Sudip, I'm going to interrupt you here for
Sure.
a second. And I think it is very important to clarify to the attendees the difference between the investing side and the operating side, right? Because
I'll come to
most people get absorbed in the investing side as young graduates. And so I think if you just differentiate how in a PE firm these 2 different roles pan out, I think that will be very useful.
Right. So in any PE firm, there is the people who make the investment into the PE firm. They are called LPs, limited partners. So these are otherwise called fund of funds. The people like Canadian Pension Plan Investment Board, CPPIB, or Ontario Teachers, or Harvard Endowment Trust, or there are similar organizations in US, in Europe, in Asia, family offices of different very super high net worth individuals, or sovereign funds like Temasek or Mumtalakat, and so on in Middle East. They invest money. They invest anywhere between 10 million to $1 billion in those companies, much like, so that's the LPs. Then the people who actually manage the private equity are the GPs, general partners. Now there are general partners who are cross-sectoral. There are general partners, which is they can be working in consumer or finance or IT or tech or industrials, etc. Or there are sector-specific, sector specialist general partners. So there is LPs and there are GPs. And under the GPs, there is a whole list of managing directors, vice presidents, associate directors, and the whole who do a lot of the real deep dive work to be able to evaluate an investment opportunity, also evaluate the market to see what trends are, also evaluate what is the right time to exit or make further investment. So that's the very broad level structure. Now, there is another group of people besides the GP, the LPs and the GPs who are really from the operating world, who have either retired CEOs, retired chairmen, or industry experts, or not retired, but they're doing that for companies. They really help the private equity firm to evaluate different companies, evaluate people, or also create a hypothesis around the industry vertical, saying that this is what's happening. So if I invest in this today, buy a company here, in 5 years' time, I do the following things, it'll be a 5x multiple in the company. So those hypotheses, so that's done. We help the operating team helps the investment team to come up with the hypotheses, validate the hypotheses, and also once an investment is made, the operating team helps the portfolio company to really, right from hiring people, sharpening strategy, do a tuck-in acquisition, sometimes make introductions to companies in their network to be able to win. So that's a high-level structure. The investment team are the people who really are finance professionals. They typically come in from investment banking organizations, CPAs, banking, and so on. And they also go deep dive into a particular industry. But largely the private equity people are, most of the people are sector specific for 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, then they move to another one because they learn the nuances of the entire industry. What are the unit economics in each kind of a company and so on. So that's the private equity. Coming back to why I came into this industry and how the accidents happen, fortunate accidents happen. In the heyday of the first tech boom, 95 onwards, I was living in California. And that was when the first startup bug happened and big boom happened in 2000. We had what was called the tech wreck. So I did a startup in 97 in the reusable intellectual property for semiconductor space. Got about 5 million of funding from the parent company. And then we did not get round 2. So I first learning into valuation, learning into equity and all that at that point of time. Before that, we owned stocks in the company in Wipro that I owned, but we didn't really understand all of this stuff. Then I worked in London for many years, then came back to India. And one of the roles I played was as the head of mergers and acquisitions and chief strategy officer. That gave me a lot of learning into the strategic side of, how do you fill up the gaps in a company's offerings or in a company's direction through acquisitions. How do you negotiate for an acquisition? How do you value an acquisition? And that is a very important role. Now, in any M&A, the big job is not in spending the money and buying the company, but after you have bought the company, to make sure your strategic objectives are met and integrate the company with the parent and how you run that. So you run that for a year or two. That's where the real operating capability comes in. So I learned that, and that was a role I was doing. And then I became president of a division in Wipro, and KKR pulled me to become the CEO. That's when I became, for 6 years, I was 5 years CEO, 1 year chairman for the KKR owned company, which is now a part of Capgemini. It was bought by Altron and then bought about $2 billion and then acquired by Capgemini. While I was in sabbatical or leave, long garden leave from Adicent, I was discussing with several private equities and this role as an operating partner for Chris Capital. Chris Capital is an Indian private equity firm. It's mid-market and growth capital. Now, in private equity, there are different kinds. There are large, big-ticket companies that each investment is 500 million to 5 billion kind of companies. There are mid-market, which are 50 million to 250, 300, 400 million. And there are turnaround private equities who take distressed assets, bring a lot of capability, either sell off parts or combine the whole thing, do bankruptcy of parts, and then they basically convert the turnaround the assets, right? Chris Capital is the one of the oldest growth capital. So we invest in companies. We anywhere between 30 million, 40 million investment to 200, $300 million investment. And then we exit that company either through an IPO or through a strategic sale. So I joined them as an operating partner in the business services, IT. And now I'm a role, which is a dual role, which is for one company, I'm an operating partner. For otherwise, I'm a senior advisor for the firm. So with my background, what are the areas I could probably answer questions for you and I can probably lead you. So that is a more embellished version of the background, including my role that I played in the US and in Europe before I came back to India 3-4 years back.
Okay, so Sudip, on behalf of the participants, let me ask you a quick question. A lot of students find this as the place to go to, right? And a lot of them are very excited about joining PE. So what do you think of this as a career?
Well, it's a great place to do a career. In our time, we didn't have the PEs as options, right? So, what was a prime role 25, 30 years back was uh, joining big firms where you have a management training program for 2 years. You do 4 or 5 or 6 roles in the 2 year period in different departments of different companies, and like Tata Administrative Service or a prime role our time. You get a perspective of many industries and many functions and become a far better general manager. So private equity role is a good role. It's a great career to build in, but it is one is probably attracted by the lucre and the high visibility and good name, bad name that the private equity industry attract. But it is an enormous amount of hard work. It is hard work, and what I have also realized is that you have to be very, very analytical, very, very. It's a combination of great analytical skills. It's a combination of building up a terrific network of the C levels in different companies of an industry. It is also being very articulate, analytical. Being only analytical back office, you will not probably go very far. So it's analytical as well as articulate to be able to have a point of view. If you don't have a point of view, you're a kind of person who's very neutral and not the right place for you. You have to have a point of view, a strong point of view, and the ability to defend that point of view against all kinds of questions and doubts and debate. Because after all, if you're strong, it's like you're putting your own money in. So you need those skills at an enormous, at a very heightened level for all of those areas. Those are some of the skills. It's a good career, definitely a worthwhile career. And over time, as you do different industries, you get a very broad-based, deep knowledge of different industries. You may not be ready. Sometimes you may be ready because you've done enough of finance and management of companies, but you want to go to the other side and actually get on the operating side. Some of you may want to do that. Some of you may not want to do that at all. And from there itself, you want to go into different boards and different advisory and do that kind of work. So there are different growth paths for that. And both of them are okay depending on what your personal desire is, your personal capability and likes are.
So Sudip, I think just 1 second. So very quickly, just you sort of brought in the subject of the skills required, and one of the skills that you said is the capability to understand different industries and have a wider perspective. And the second one you said is to be able to voice it and speak up about it. So would you like to elaborate on this and talk about any other skills that you think are important, which students at this age can develop and nurture to get ready for something like this?
Yeah. Fortunately or unfortunately, that famous book, What They Don't Teach You at Harvard Business School, right? I don't think any school teaches the stuff that you really need. You got to learn on the job. So clearly, you got to be thinking a bit out of the box. Sometimes the first principle thinking, and it is okay to be able to do stock market, analyze the stock, what's happening, EBITDA is going up, revenue is going up, growth rate and all this stuff. But go further beyond as to what are the secular trends in technology or regulation, or in what is the company's secret in terms of how they are differentiating, how they're able to build a moat, a defensible moat, and how that moat is shifting every 2 years so that they retain an unfair advantage. So you got to go. So what I'm saying is you need to do first principles thinking, or be critical thinking is a very important capability to develop, because if you follow the herd, you will not be able to beat the herd in making money. If the typical industry sector returns are 20% or 10% and you want to make a 30% return, you got to do something different, right? So critical thinking is something you got to learn and understand. Okay, I should have. So post-mortem helps. Very frequently go back. I let this opportunity go. What are the assumptions I made, and which of the assumptions panned out, did not pan out, or which are the ones that did not assume and that happened, right? So critical thinking and learning on that constantly is one requirement. Then, as I mentioned, obviously, apart from critical thinking, is one of communication. internally in the private equity, because there's a voting kind of a thing that happens where everyone has to, or most people have to vote as you get senior on a particular deal to invest, not to invest. If you want to invest, justify with very strong reasons. If you don't want to invest, say no, justify again with very strong reasons as to why you should not vote. Once you have made the investment, very often, and a P timeline is not like that of a venture capitalist timeline. Venture capitalists want returns in 2, 3, 4 years. Private equity wants return in 5 years, 6 years. The fund life is 10 to 12 years. Some private equities are much longer life. So you really, and you're not in making small investment of 1 million, 2 million, you're making 50 million, 100 million investment in a company, whether it's a small stake. So you have to work with the management of that company to convince them to do things sometimes they may not be used to, they may not be thinking of, because you're bringing your critical thinking and you have to communicate that. So this brings in communication skills, negotiation skills with senior management. Even though you are only 30 or 25, you don't have operating experience, you got to convince a CEO or another C-level person who's 45, 50, 55, has done the 30 years, this is the reason why you should do that. So critical thinking, communication, negotiation skills, and negotiation and communication together also bring in a fourth thing, which is called collaboration. So you do not want to be able to, even if you own a controlling stake, you do not want to be able to run the company, because you are not the owner, you're the owner, but you've got professional management running the company. So how do you collaborate with them? Now, these are not things that you learn in any school, any college. So you got to be focused that, am I learning communication? Am I learning critical thinking? Am I thinking creatively in out of the box thinking? Am I doing that or not, right? So those are some of the skills. I mean, I'm not giving you the stuff which all of you will do in MBA or are doing, which is, great spreadsheet modeling, what if scenarios, sensitivity analysis, all of that. I'm not saying because that's par for the course. Everyone will do that, but need to be a bit different to be able to get that. How, and it's something in PE, private equity world, because you are investing year 1, year 10, year 15, all your career, you got to be moving very, very rapidly with the times, because industry changes. You got to keep in touch. Who are the old stars are no longer the stars, and why they're no longer the stars? Who are the new stars? So you've got to be learning all the time. In PE world, I've seen the learning just does not stop. So often you are having lots of sessions with experts coming in, giving you talk. So unless you're on top of the curve, you can't beat the curve, right? So that's a very important angle in PE. Have I answered the question, Salil, or do you think something more?
Yeah, I think so, and we'll wait for the responses. But Sudip, leading this, this leads us to another question which we had posed for you earlier. So given these skills, and given that the fact that the typical management education does not necessarily teach these skills, how does a student prepare? And I'm happy to, have a dialogue with you on this, because I have some views as well. But, I would really like to hear from you, and I'm sure the people here would benefit. So if we take up, let's say, just one, for example, you said critical thinking. How does a person start, developing critical thinking? There are not too many courses for critical thinking.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we probably have to develop some courses, critical thinking. And, let's say, I'll give you one example, right? Last 4 weeks, all of the IT and tech companies have announced the results, right? And you have, let's say, an Indian company, Hexaware, Indian company, HCL Tech, L&T Infotech, all have declared results. And those results have been analyzed by at least 5 or 10 different analysts, from JP Morgan to Morgan Stanley to IIFL to Kotak, to so many people, right? If you read all the analysis, you'll find that there is one who stands out, or two who stand out, because they look at different parts or different, they have asked different questions in the analyst call. Now you realize that they are thinking something different, their model is different. So then they become the ones who are looking at it, right? In any industry, any sector, you will find that one or two of them who are the lead thinkers, and the others follow them or have derivative thoughts of them, right? So if you follow that long enough, there's a pattern, right? Into how, so what are the things? So often what happens is the routine, the regular becomes so time consuming, all consuming, you don't have time to think through and reflect and do back. So one of the things I did when I was running a 18,000 people operation is that your calendar is chock-a-block. You have no time to have food sometimes, right? So after a year or so, I realized that this is becoming too much of a treadmill. I forced my admin to create a half-day block, Friday afternoon or Friday morning, wherever there are no meetings, no calls. I'm on my own, and I'm not in office also. So people got to know that I'm on my own. Now that is to go through old correspondence, talk to some people I want to talk to. So you've got to create time for reflection and reflect. Otherwise, work is a drug. Business and meetings are a drug. So that's one thing, right? Follow the people who are different in the industry. Like there used to be a guy long back called Paul Sappho in when I was in my 20s and 30s. He used to be in Stanford University, but not in Stanford. He used to be the head of something called Institute of the Future. So really advanced thoughts. So followed them for a long time. Day before yesterday, I was on a seminar with Aspen Institute, right? Just two ladies, one lady who follows technology from FT, interviewing a lady from NYU Stern called Amy Webb. Then I looked up Amy Webb. Oh my God, she's in her 30s, got a 9-year-old daughter, but she is absolutely outstandingly brilliant. Looking at what's going to happen because of COVID, everyone's giving one stream of thoughts, work from home and all that. You see her thoughts radically different. And you can look up Amy Webb. She's a music major. And after music major, she did masters in music and then went to work in rural Japan for something, right? And then she's a professor now in NYU, and she's from, so I'm now going to follow her. So you find those people, they stimulate a different kind of thinking, which otherwise you're there in your brain, but you never stimulate that. So to a thought, but I think, Salil, there is a need for, there used to be a thing we used to have called management of creativity and innovation, right? That has not kept pace.
Exactly the same thing.
But that's not kept pace with the times, I think. This has changed significantly. Yeah.
I know. So I wanted to say exactly the same thing to the students. I personally benefited hugely from a course called Management of Creativity and Innovation. And Sudip and I are exactly on the same page. And that course is not being offered these days by very many institutes. And if you can study, if you can read about creativity, if you can read about creativity and innovation, I think that's a sure way of starting to develop critical thinking. Because when you talk about out of the box thinking, it's very easy to use the word out of the box thinking, but it's very difficult to practice out of the box thinking, because you tend to get, it requires you to be starting to think differently. It needs that you start reading different kinds of things, meeting different kind of people, open your mind to new ideas, etc., etc. Sudeep, let me take up a few questions. So there's a question here from, which is a very, very specific question, but if you can quickly answer, it'd be nice. It's a question from Devdutt Naik. It says, in the Indian PE arena, which sector industry makes up the majority number value of deals? I do not know if you have a very specific direct answer for that, or if you can guide.
I don't have the data on that. So I know, for example, that people are investing in retail consumer, in telecom, in industrials, in healthcare, pharma. It's a whole area. I don't have the data. You can go to Preqin or one of those sites and see in the last 5 years which area has got attracted higher investments. But that's one question. But you'll always follow. Everyone talks of Android market share in the phone business, right? That's one way to look at it. But no one talks about it. And Steve Jobs and Tim Cook keep absolutely quiet. Market share is good, but what about profit share? 94% of the profits go to Apple. Absolutely. And the rest of the world enjoys 4% of the profit. So, they kept in quiet. So who cares for profit share? So likewise, who cares about investment? You should say where the returns are coming from, which sector is getting the highest amount of returns, right? So again, non-tax analysts will, as a herd, put you in one way. You look at a different way and do that.
Okay. So question from Ankit, we talked about, he's talking about what skills are needed. So we briefly talked about the skills, but he has got another question. Is it different from what Goldman Sachs does? So, I think that's a very specific question.
Goldman Sachs has a private equity arm. So they do similar as any other private equity. And typically Goldman Sachs I think they do both. So it's not different, but Goldman Sachs is a financial supermarket. So, I assume you're meaning Goldman Sachs private equity. Are they very different? No, they're not very different. They also raise money from different private equity funds, high net worth individuals, billionaires, and raise money and invest in them. They may not be in all the sectors. They could be in some of the sectors where they specialize and do that. Likewise, Bain is a consulting firm, but Bain has a Bain Capital, which is completely Chinese walled. They raise money and do that activity. Bank of America had a private equity arm. One thing, interesting thing, even though Salil and I both went through management of creativity innovation, I left a much bigger job in Wipro as a president, which was managing almost $1.5 billion, $1.3 billion of business, 18,000 people, and moved to a much smaller firm. Of course, the attraction was private equity and CEO from a president. In a large company, you learn about P&L. You never learn about balance sheet. It's only when you move to a private equity company, you realize how important balance sheet is. Correct. So I relearned Manac 1 and 2 when I became CEO of Adicent, because it was a highly leveraged firm in terms of debt in the balance sheet and so on. But more than that, one attractive piece was there were two divisions in Adicent. One was a classic software company like Infosys or TCS or Wipro, though more focused on the telecom side. The other was a design entity called Frog Design. And I after having joined, created a consulting unit, which was a different group of people. And I often joked that I had a consulting where you do design strategy, then you do the design, and then you do the actual development and delivery of the people, right? So jokingly, I used to call the people that one is a bunch of Gucci's and Armani's. Then come the designers who are pointy hair, spiky shoes, and torn jeans. And then comes the software people who are jeans and khakis and crew neck. Each of them were brilliant in their own way, but thought the other two are idiots, right? But the idea was putting them together. But my point being, so my eyes opened to Frog when I worked with Frog Design, and outstandingly brilliant people. They don't look like corporate animals, but their thinking is so sharp. We would manage to wrangle a 1-hour meeting with the CEO of a large company. And in that 1-hour meeting, he'll be so blown out of his mind. He'll call his secretary, clear the table for the whole day and say, no, let's talk more. You realize that they do research and go design research. So you realize that creative thinkers are very different kind of people. The design firms, it is like herding cats. You have these really creative people who can't work together. To make them work together, magic happens at the right time, right? So it's very important to learn. It's not just understanding how to be critical thinker and how to be creative, but how to manage creativity is also very interesting. It's a very complex process.
So Abhinandan Sinha has asked a question, how does one get into these roles? But I think he also said that you've answered that. So Sudeep, I'm going to take the next 5 minutes and we'll not spend more than 5 minutes. We'll end at 4:50. I just want to spend 5 more minutes on talking about the second skill that you talked about, communication skills, right? Again, communication skills is something that, very easy to talk about. Everyone thinks they know how to talk and listen, but is there more to it? What is your perspective?
So there are very, very few people who have honed the skill where off the cuff, they can speak sensibly, logically, convincingly, right? There are very Correct. Few Bill Clintons and Barack Obamas.
Correct.
Narendra Modi is also a good speaker at times. But though they are more, so there is an emotional appeal that they can do very well, but they may not be very strong on facts and figures at the point of time, right? Whereas if you look at a Bill Clinton, he was different from Barack Obama and Narendra Modi in the sense he would have actual numbers at the fingertips, right? He was very, very good in that sense. Now, how do you become a good speaker? Did you know how many times Steve Jobs practiced before his presentation for launching a product? On the smaller side, 400 times. On the higher side, 400 times. Not 5 times, 10 times, 400 times. He's even known, he spent a couple of 100 hours just practicing how to speak. So one is that learn, have each word needs to carry itself when you say. The second thing is learn away from this use of slides. What you say in the slide should complement what you are saying, right? Most often, we follow the McKinsey principle of having the slide is a book, right? You're reading the slide, and you'll find that they've given 50 slides, so you could have read it beforehand, and they will jump from slide 1 to slide 10 to 13 to 18 to 22, and the message is there, right? Uh, so how it's slide is only a speaking aid, communication aid, right? Anticipating, in the talk, as to what are the likely questions, and try to keep it not like a conversational, more like a teacher. This is a problem. So if I do this, my next question is, how do I do that? And if I do that, is the answer. So keep it in that kind of a logical flow. It's got to be learned, and the way to communicate, there's no universal. I think it's not need to be tailored on the subject too, on the industry too, and on the audience too, who you're talking to, right? Often, there are people who say that if you can't present your whole business proposal in one page, you're not on top of it, right? If you can't communicate your whole idea to a group of people in 30 minutes, you or 20 minutes. So when you ask VCs, when the different people asking for money to them to present, he says in the first 3 slides, the first 5 minutes, we get a feel. Is the guy saying very precisely and crystal clear what is the problem is solving and why, and then how, right? If you can't do that, you're going industries like that, markets like that, and so you've already lost the game, right? So being very precise, and this is change. The patience of the younger people, new generation, is very different. You got to tailor it, and there's no substitute for enormous amount of practice or communication. And you have to do it, practice it, and get people to critique your talk.
So Sudip, I'm going to build on what you said. So I'm going to leave 2 tips for all the attendees here. So the first one is to pick up a bunch of friends and choose a topic, or let them give you a random topic and speak to them on that topic for a few 2 or 3 minutes and see how you do. How you make, what sense do you make? So even if, your favorite subject is cricket, talking about the last match you watched on TV would be challenging for people, because I've asked that question to people and people are not able to, come up with a meaningful discourse for 2 minutes, which can hold the audience. So that's tip number 1, which is something that you can do on a weekly basis or every month or as often as you can. The second thing is to learn how to present yourself in a meaningful way and to attract interest in the first 20-30 seconds of your conversation. So invariably, if you meet somebody, you start by saying, okay, please tell us about yourself. And that's where, if you do not have a story to be able to attract attention in the first 20 seconds, the person has switched off and he or she is not listening to you anymore. So practice that. And this is something that will come in very useful in your interviews, which you're going to face in less than a year's time. Sudeep, any more such practical tips?
Very, very good point. Let me build on your last one.
Okay.
So I believe there will be a role in most companies going forward, which will be called CSO. And the CSO is not Chief Strategy Officer or Chief Scientific Officer. It will be Chief Storytelling Officer. It will be. And they will be people who will have backgrounds in finance or backgrounds in technology and such stuff, but also have a liberal arts subjects mastery, one of them. Because storytelling, taking it to the thing, is a very, very critical component. And one of the questions that I saw came in, so someone asked me, how was the experience working in India, US, and then Europe? So I worked in India, then worked 6 years in US, then from there moved to London and worked in Europe for 4-5 years, came back to India for 5, and then again went back to US for 7. So it's like a new job, new learning, right? Very different. And you find that the way you present and talk to people and socialize in US is radically different from India, which again is radically different from in Europe. And within Europe, how you handle a business dinner in France is very different from how you do a business dinner in London, right? So there are very different expectations on how you do. So you have to be and actually I actually took cultural training, fortunately, from people as to what to do, what not to do. I was lucky to have gone through that. There's a firm I used, ladies passed away earlier this year. Her firm was called Global Savvy. They taught the Americans how to deal with Indians how to deal with Americans, Americans with Chinese and all this stuff. So America, I found after going from India that you are trying to make calls, right? In 90s, between 94 and 2000, when I was in US, a client would not meet you till it was absolutely essential to meet you. They will do everything on the phone call because the implicit trust is there. At the end, one day they will meet you. But the business proceeds completely well. Whereas India, you actually want to see the guy, shake his hand, look him in the eye, and do all this stuff, right? That's critical. Same in Japan. Japan, again, is very different. I've done so much business in Japan.
The Japanese will meet you 10 times and still not give you business.
Yes, and in Japan, if he signs an NDA, that's a massive move because he's moved a paper. It's almost, you're halfway there to winning the order if he signs an NDA with you. You can sign whatever contract you do, but what you or your boss or your junior went up and wrote on the board and they pressed a button and took a copy of that, that is sacrosanct over your document, right? Communication is so critical. I realize in USA that Germans are the better engineer, but they can't tell the story as well of their products. Whereas Americans are not as good engineers, but tell the story far better, and therefore they have a higher market share in the world. So it's very important to learn. There are hundreds of things we can on the cultural thing itself in terms of how you do. There's a whole discussion you can do how you succeed in different countries.
So there was a question from Yash Jaju, which has sort of been answered. How was the experience abroad different from India? Yash, I think some of those points have been covered, but I don't think we will cover much more of that. I think the cultural training, understanding how different cultures, people behave in different cultures. The cultures are different even in the north and south of India. So if you are having meetings in South India, they can be very different from meetings in North India. And being sensitive to some of these things can be very, very meaningful. So any last questions, anybody? Quickly. Otherwise, we can wind up now. If there are any more questions in the next half a minute, great. Otherwise, let me first thank Sudip for joining us. If you all enjoyed it, can we have a thumbs up or a show of hands or, something on the chat? In a webinar mode, it's not possible to get everyone to speak.
I know.
But,
I know. Yeah.
I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you, Sudip. And we shall do more of these. We will have try and involve different people to come in and make it as practical and as realistic as possible, and try and cover what Sudip mentioned earlier, what we do not teach at Maryland School. So
you should also get into the webinar mode with interaction. People can in webinar mode put up thumbs, and people can actually.
So that was an option.
Experiment.
We just tried to do
Next
this
time.
the first time.
Next time, yeah.
Okay, thank you for all your comments.
All right, thank you very
very much. And that's all from us.